It seems you have occupied varying positions on Trump at various times. Where are you on Donald Trump now? And particularly perhaps how that relates to the emergence of radical anti-establishment figures within the Democrat Party, notably RFK.
Where am I on Trump now? Well, I love Trump, personally. I mean, I made a huge mistake last November.
I don't believe that.
In getting involved in American politics, something I've never done before. And making calls, this guy's going to win. I think this is going to happen in this state. Meet your new governor in New York, stuff like that. And I was wrong on almost every call. I'm not a very astute political analyst. I'm not interested in politics. I never have been interested in politics. I'm interested in ideas. I'm interested in people. And so there's a primary going on in the United States between Trump and a bunch of other people, primarily Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, but others, Vivek Ramaswamy, for example. And I haven't said word one about it. Don't plan to. I think looking back on this 10 years from now, assuming we're still around, I think we're going to see Trump's emergence as the most significant thing to happen in American politics in 100 years, because he reoriented the Republican Party against the wishes of Republican leaders.
Right.
But when I think about Trump right now, so it's July of 2023, I'm struck by his foreign policy views. Trump is the only person with stature in the Republican Party, really, who's saying, wait a second, why are we supporting an endless war in Ukraine? And that, leaving aside whether Trump's going to get the nomination or get elected president or would be a good president, I can't even assess that.
Dude, the military-industrial complex, I mean, when people say, like, we're being run by a small group of people, it's like, of course we are. They're rich, wealthy, military-industrial complex, pharmaceutical-industrial complex, corporate board members and executives. Duh. And of course, there is a financial incentive to go to war. And it's very easy to justify, as many people do who are not part of the military-industrial complex, even if there's a profit to be made for these industrial complex companies going to war, there are still other reasons that would justify going to Ukraine, which is true in principle. Of course, just because the military-industrial complex exists does not mean we should not fund the military and we should not engage in military action where it makes sense. The problem is, though, it's those incentives get skewed, and that's why you have Dwight Eisenhower giving the speech right before he ended his presidency, warning about the military-industrial complex. That's kind of like crazy if you think about it. The American education system's racist. It's whitewashed. We don't learn about certain things. True, to some degree, that's true. There's a lot of important things we don't learn. This is one of them.
A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
The farewell address of Dwight Eisenhower, who, for those who don't know, Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in Europe. So this guy won World War II, military man, pointing out in 50-something, that the military-industrial complex is a real thing.
All I can say at this point is I'm so grateful that he has that position. He's right. And everyone in Washington's wrong. Everyone. And Trump is right on that question. And it's a big question. That war is reshaping the world. It's reshaping the economy of the world. It's reshaping populations. I was just in Romania last week, which is, of course, shares a border with Ukraine. The refugees in that region, the number of people killed in that war. I mean, Europe will never be the same because of this war. And it really matters. And Trump alone among popular figures in both parties understands that. And I'm grateful for it. Whether he gets the nomination or gets elected, words really matter. Saying something true out loud matters. And he is saying true things about Ukraine, and God bless him. That's how I feel.
So Trump generated, I suppose, a new type of populism. He rebooted politics. He reordered the Republican Party. And perhaps is it fair to say that other than the significant fact that he was less militaristic significantly than other comparable presidents, at least recent presidents, I mean by that, do you think that he delivered in office? Why do you think he remains so fascinating? Do you think that the Americans, broadly speaking, that are attracted to Donald Trump are attracted by his foreign policy stance, or do you think that there's something else? And do you not think that RFK, who's, my understanding, he's been on the show a couple of times, he's now on Rumble, and I find him to be a very admirable man. He similarly is vehemently anti-war, anti this conflict, and seems to also have identified the unspoken intention to be the deracination and annihilation of Russia for globalist and economic reasons, rather than the rather naive assumption that it's in any way a humanitarian conflict.
It's for democracy. That's my favorite. It's for democracy. Okay.
That laugh that Tucker does, that can work sometimes, but it's forced often. That's why to the degree that Tucker is flawed, which obviously he is flawed, it's that forced like laughter. And they're just like, you can make the point without having to do that.
People who hate democracy. Well, I love Bobby Kennedy. And I've had him on my show many times. He announced for president on my show, which took a lot of stones on his part, given how despised I am by a lot of Democratic primary voters. I think he's a wonderful person. I'll say that. Just as a man, I admire him. He said the greatest thing any politician or any public figures ever said to me at dinner a couple of years ago. They've gone after his family. The pharma companies and their agents in the media have really gone after his family, his siblings. They convinced a bunch of his siblings to denounce his views. So painful. And I'm so close to my family, I can't even imagine that. And I said to him, what's that like? I thought I took a lot of shit. I can't even imagine what that would be like. If my brother denounced me, I'd shoot myself. I couldn't handle it.
Also, if it was Buck, he would be able to provide the weapon.
He would. Yeah. Well, yeah. My brother's not going to denounce me. It's my best friend and wonderful man. But anyway, so I said to him, what's that like? And he said, and I'm quoting, probably shouldn't be quoting a private conversation, but he said this to me. He said, I've got 7 children and they all love me. I don't care.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, you want to distill my values into a sentence? That's the sentence. So I really admire him. I don't agree with him on everything. I do agree with him, I'll just be honest, on most things, on the big things.
Yeah.
And so, no, I love what he's doing. I love his bravery, which is just remarkable. The amount that man has suffered for what he thinks is true, the amount of money he's lost, the friends he's lost. He's been ostracized in a way most people can't even understand because he ticked off a drug company, really? And he's persevered, and I really admire him.
If RFK and Trump have risen, as they plainly have, to capture the popular imagination, and yet both to a degree are stymied, shackled, or reluctantly tolerated by their party, what does that tell us about the shifting sands of American political life? I think the area where you and I most plainly and overtly align, perhaps other than the belief in God, I suppose, is our deep understanding that the military-industrial complex and big pharma are able to exert significant power over the Democratic Party, democratic process, but renders ordinary electoral
and Republican Party
basically meaningless.
Yes.
These two figures are like populist anti-establishment figures in a sense. What do you feel is the likelihood of either of them being able to pass through the internal mechanics of their parties, in the case of RFK, through the legal hurdles that are being placed in front of Trump at the moment? And what is the role of independent media, in particular, say, a figure like Elon Musk, who seems, at the moment at least, to have the power to fight on that terrain? I know there was a lot in that question, Tuck.
I'll answer first so I don't get copyright struck. If Trump goes to prison, this is why I said why I believe there'll be civil conflict. This is one of many reasons, but that would be the catalyst. You'd have January 6th in many different cities. Then also the other thing, RFK Jr. has been going on a lot of podcasts, and it is interesting to see the next 5 to 10 years, assuming we're around, I think it really will be podcast style online digital media influencers who shift public opinion. And it's a lot more fractionated because with CNN and Fox News, it's a few. So it only takes a few people to conspire to create a narrative. But when it's fractionated, it's sort of like Bitcoin, where Bitcoin and blockchain, you can't defraud it or whatever, because when a transaction is made, it goes to everyone's thing and it's decentralized. With media and influence and creating narrative and pushing ideas, when it's a small group of people, you can defraud it and just keep the main narrative because there's only like 3 companies saying the same thing. But when it's defragmented, you don't have any other option than to tell the truth, because you can't get other people to conspire to hide reality. So I do think the digital media world is going to play a significant role. And that certainly is in part why I am doing these live streams, because I would like, to the degree that I can, to have a positive impact in a way that I believe I can make, all in due time.
Well, I would say a couple things. One, the United States has had precisely in 250 years, almost one populist president. And that was Teddy Roosevelt, also the most popular president in American history, who was president from 1901. President who he served as VP was shot to death until 1908. Most popular president the United States ever had, and he was a populist. The two biggest populist figures in the moment are Trump and Bobby Jr., and then we had a guy called Ross Perot run about.
I don't know much about Teddy Roosevelt, but I am now inspired to look into him more. Also in part because when you play America in Civilization 6, Civ 5, Civ 6, Teddy Roosevelt is the guy, which is normally George Washington or Lincoln, but Teddy Roosevelt's up there.
All four of those figures had one thing in common. They were all from the world they criticized. So you think of populist, the English peasant revolt, which is one of the most interesting things ever to happen, where they stormed the Tower of London and they killed the Archbishop.
I'm from there. That started in Essex.
Yes.
Wat Tyler.
Yeah, Wat Tyler, exactly. We're not even sure if that was his real name. And Wat Tyler. And, but he was a legit peasant. Like, we don't even know when he was born. And that was not an effective rebellion. Of course, they did not free the serfs after that, as I recall. But the effective populists are the ones who critique from the inside and say, I grew up in this world. Teddy Roosevelt grew up rich. Of course,
interesting.
Trump, Perot, Bobby Kennedy's family is one of the most famous families in the world in modern history, the Kennedys, and certainly the most famous family in Democratic politics. So these are people who know how the system works because they've benefited from the system.
That's interesting. That is a very interesting point. First off, that's also exactly what Tucker is. So my immediate thought was, oh, this is Tucker's rationalization for what he's doing, because Tucker is quite the elitist, even though he is a populist. And I don't mean elitist. I mean like he's rich and all that and stuff or whatnot. Wears a suit. If you wear a suit, you're an elitist. But that's a very interesting point. The people who come from the problem or the area where the problem is are usually the ones who are most successful in critiquing it. That makes sense. That's the idea of, maybe I'm drawing too much of an archetypal connection here, but I think it makes sense. It's like the shadow, the darkness within you is what allows you to confront the real darkness, right? There are no good people. There are only bad people who choose to do good things. Harry Potter has a piece of Voldemort in him. Harry Potter can talk to snakes. Spider-Man gets bit by a radioactive spider, predator, all that stuff. It's like the people who have the darkness within them, the capacity for corruption, are the best able to deal with it. Interesting. I think that's true, because otherwise you're just naive. You don't know how the system works. AOC, too idealistic, came in. I think it's endorsing Joe Biden. So it's like, okay, well, that worked out for her.
And so their critique is much more meaningful and much more effective, I would say, because they can bear witness to what they have seen. I don't think Trump has changed politics in Washington. I think the parties both have been very resistant to any kind of reform. And that's very foolish. That's a Ceausescu move. You see things changing around you and you can't metabolize it. You can't sort of change with the moment. And then you meet a bad end when you become that rigid. I think that Bobby Kennedy and Trump will both have a very tough time getting the nomination. I'm hoping that both of them will, of course, I guess. I'm hoping that their message will be heard. I don't know. I don't even know what I hope for in the process itself, but I want them to be heard. And they can now be heard because there are channels of information that people can tune into and listen. I mean,
it'd be hilarious if Bobby Kennedy will not win the Democrat nomination. Trump will probably win the Republican one. Trump should pick RFK Jr. as his running mate. That'll fuck some shit up. Or Tulsi Gabbard. But I don't know, RFK Jr. That would be, people would not be happy if Trump RFK wins. I'll tell you that.
I would amend one thing you said when you said that, these huge multinationals control our politics. Well, they also control our media.
Yeah.
They do. I mean, pharma, as you well know and often say on your show, is the biggest advertiser on American television. Probably true in the UK as well. And so, there's no incentive whatsoever to question their products. And now we have, because of the social media companies, Twitter and Rumble, and probably others, we have less filtered sources of information with fewer gatekeepers and a higher probability you'll hear something true. I think that's a huge change. I mean, how can you, this is like Samizdat. This is like, this is like information that the people in charge don't want you to see. And now you can see it. It really is the promise of the internet finally fulfilled. That's my hope anyway.
Figures like RFK and Trump already demonstrably through his successful use of Twitter are going to require new models of media in order to build an audience, whether or not you align with the views of those individuals. It's plain to see that the traditional media models curtail and censor their rhetoric. Why, when you left Fox News, I think, like, for those of us that work in the independent media space, all thought, like, Tucker's leaving. Like, even if I may say, like, when we met, I was like, he's going to leave Fox. Like, I felt like just because of your awareness and because of the stuff you were saying about the mainstream, the fact you're having Glenn Greenwald on there and people
every week from his bunker in Rio. I love Glenn.
Yeah, he's a beautiful human being.
Yes,
he's no doubt a brilliant man. So we were all amongst us thinking, where will Tucker go? Is it going to be Tucker? Will he be joining us on Rumble? Will you set up your own thing. What was it about your conversations with Elon Musk that led you to work there on Twitter?
Well, I don't work for Elon. He's paid me zero money. I don't think I ever want to work for anyone again. I've done that. I'd like to make money. I mean, I think that's fair. I've made zero money since I left, and that's fine. But at some point I'd like to, but I'm not working for Elon Musk. He hasn't offered to hire me, and if he did, I wouldn't accept. But what he's done is offered me what he's offered every other user of Twitter, which is a chance to broadcast your views without a gatekeeper there.
Again, going back to Tucker is a cultural figure, like Bill O'Reilly, classic Fox News person, has no reach outside of the 60-year-old audience. I have a friend who is completely apolitical, can't stand even bringing up politics or even anything remotely. And because Tucker is on Twitter now, he will see Tucker show up in his feed and he'll watch him for like 5 minutes or whatever. And I was in the car with him a few weeks ago and he said, Tucker says things that like make sense. I like people say he's a white supremacist. I don't believe that. It's like, oh yeah. This is a whole new like people on Twitter. I know Twitter, what is it? TikTok is the young Gen Z, whatever group or whatever, but like there's a massive new audience that Tucker will reach. And many of those people who don't know, who've never watched a single clip of him will just be like, isn't Tucker kind of the like far right, like white supremacist guy or whatever? Then they'll watch him for 6 minutes and go, I agree with this guy. What else are people lying to me about? Right? That's again, it's always good to be on the side of truth. If you are lying about someone and saying this person is a that when they're not, then inevitably what will happen, maybe not inevitably, but people will find out that you were lying. Because if I label, Destiny's a communist or Bernie Sanders is a communist or Tucker Carlson's a white supremacist or all these different things, then all it takes is for someone to listen to that one time and go, oh, wait, I personally agree with what this person's saying. And I heard this person was a communist the whole time. And then reality will play out in such a way that the person lying and saying Bernie Sanders is literally a communist or Tucker Carlson is a white supremacist will eventually lose all the credibility. And the people who were bought into that lie will feel a sense of betrayal by that lie and want to identify with the person they listen to more. At least that's my readout of my psychological experience with that, hearing people and going, oh, this person actually isn't this crazy stuff that people have said.
But I do think, I think the technology at Twitter is, my expectation, is evolving. And I think, the subscription model, might work or it might not. I don't know, but I think it might. And I plan to stay there. But what social media offer in the short term, at least for me, is an audience, but also a reason, this is personal, but a reason to write. I can't think clearly without writing. I started in this business as a magazine writer and a book writer, newspaper writer, and I need to write things out. I'm very dyslexic and I can't, I have trouble processing information in certain ways. And unless I'm forced to write a script, I can't really decide what I think about something. And so the daily or regular discipline of writing a script forces me, and in some cases it really is forced. I don't want to do it. I'd much rather go fishing or bird hunting. I would, but if I have to, I will. And there's something wonderful in that. Writing a script, as forces you to think through everything about the issue, to have a much deeper.
Writing is formalized thinking. When I started making videos and I had a reason to write and organize my thoughts, I feel like I definitely gained clarity in my thoughts. And stuff I thought I knew, but couldn't recall in just a regular conversation or whatever. Once you write it down, it's much more accessible.
But also, on that, they said, of course, these FBI whistleblowers, that the FBI had a significant number of agents, that there were other law enforcement agencies there on January the 6th. In fact, it was the whistleblowing on this subject.
Of course,
number of agents, all this grief. In a sense, that there are some discrepancies, shall we say, on how that event was initially reported on.